Hi, welcome to Module 3 for Introduction to Political Science. This module focuses on American government. For most of us here, that's a pretty familiar subject. For anybody who is just coming along, or for anybody who's lived here your whole life, but maybe you might have forgotten a little bit, or maybe like a little bit more about how it all works. Sort of the cornerstones for American government are that we have three branches and three tiers. So the three branches are pretty familiar. We have Congress, which is the House and the Senate. We have an executive, which is the president, and we have judicial, which is the Supreme Court. This is at the national level. So these three branches play around with each other and have checks and balances over each other's power. Congress is overall the most powerful. Congress has the ability to raise and lower taxes, to pass laws, to have congressional committees, overwatch committees, congressional oversight. Congress kind of has a lot of checks on the presidential power. A lot of times if the president nominates somebody, it is Senate and or the House that has to confirm those nominations. Congress is also the only branch with the power to impeach the sitting president. Meanwhile, the president has a lot of power because all that power is basically in the hands of one individual. Now, of course, there are many people who make up staff members for the executive branch of government, but the president, sort of as the figurehead of that branch, um, holds more power for one individual than Congress does. And meanwhile, the courts have the most power because they are the last stop in any sort of measurement. So Congress may pass a law, the president may sign that law into effect, but then if the courts rule that that law is unconstitutional, it's done, it's over. So the courts kind of have the last say. But then the courts also are limited by the fact that here in the United States we have concrete judicial review, so the courts can't just sort of squirm their way into anything. They have to have a case brought to them. So the courts can't just up and decide that they don't like something the president does and make it unconstitutional. Somebody somewhere has to bring a case to the court. Of course, there are 9 Supreme Court justices who sit on the Supreme Court, and they hear about somewhere between 1% and 10% of all cases brought to them. So a lot of cases that make it to the Supreme Court don't actually make it to the Supreme Court. Then we also have the 3 different tiers of government. So you guys are probably familiar with it. So we have national level, state level, and local level. And if you were paying attention before, then you would know that those branches are actually, or that those tiers, sorry, are actually misnamed. So national is actually federal, and state is actually sub-state, and then local is local. So don't get confused. We talk about the difference between a nation and a state and all that. Our United States of America is a state. Our states are actually sub-states, and then our local government is a sub-sub-state. But for the most part, each of these tiers acts the same. So each state has its own constitution. Each state has its own Congress. Each state has its own executive in the form of a governor, and each state has its own Supreme Court. And then the local level, they're handled all different ways. You might have municipalities, you might have counties, you might have mayors, you might have town managers. It just depends. The local level is really the most varied. Most states act like the federal government in the way they're set up. The only one that's kind of weird would be Nebraska, for example, doesn't have a House and a Senate. They have a unicameral Congress. But for the most part, that's the gist of the American government system and the way it's set up. American government relies heavily upon the writers of the Federalist Papers, Jay, Madison, and Hamilton. Several of the Federalist Papers are noteworthy. I have you guys reading Federalist 10 because 10 talks about the power of factions. Basically, the Federalist Papers were just these authors' attempts at convincing the people, specifically the people of New York, to accept the new Constitution and the new type of government. Federalist 10 basically tells us why a representative republic is the best type of government that one could have. In Federalist 10, um, the justification for our type of government is that this notion of factioning, or basically interest groups, political parties, right? And that the cause is human nature, because different people have different ideologies, different beliefs, different passions, different things that drive them. That there will never be a system of government that is all inclusive and makes everybody happy. And Federalist 10 says there's no reason to try to, you know, end human nature. That all we can do is control the effects. And Federalist 10 warns against majority rule. We have a pure democracy that whichever group is the most powerful, will have the most power, obviously. But if you pair it with a republic, representation, and, you know, the ability for the different factions to pull on each other through pluralism, that you have a type of government that kind of rests in the middle, never too extreme. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll leave that up to you to decide. But obviously, Madison, Hamilton, and Jay believed it was a good thing. A lot of times when I teach American government, I end up finding out that a lot of my students are Americentric, believing that the U.S. Is exceptional, or a lot of times this fill in the blank USA, the blank country becomes the best country. I have a video here that I want you guys to watch. It's really short. It's fictional, but it's really a good point. It really drives home this idea of why do Americans consider themselves to be best, and what does that reality look like? In truth, and you'll read this in the articles that I posted, America, USA, is a rather different country in a lot of ways. Several aspects that we have that are sort of cornerstone of our Americanness include individualisticness, the mantra of hard work, belief in social mobility, and a high amount of religious influence for such a developed nation. Now, oddly enough, you might be looking at these and thinking, yes, that is the recipe for success. But in actuality, it's a recipe for disaster. Read the article, find out more. But basically, individualistic, right, just means that we believe in ourselves and not in our community. The hard work mantra means that we believe the harder we work, the more we'll get ahead, which is proven to be not true. And then a belief in social mobility means that, you know, you can become anything you want to become, and can be anyone you want to be, if you just, you know, dedicate yourself to it. And that quite frequently doesn't work either. So America is kind of a bit of a letdown country, if we're going to be honest with ourselves. But anyway, read the article. It's quite an interesting read. And then finally, want to touch on one of the main issues that affects people. A lot of times we hear about it. It's sort of the dissenting crux between Republicans and Democrats, right? Is this economy, concept of money problems, right? And I'm going to post this link as well for you to check out. So make sure you take a look at the U.S. debt clock to show just how in debt the U.S. is, and play around on there. You can look and see, well, where is most of the debt? Where's most of the money coming from? What are people spending what on? What cars sell the best? It's just a really interesting snapshot of the economy and all the economic problems that we have. I have no idea what the amount of money is going to be right now, because it literally changes, you know, millisecond by millisecond. But it's going to be in the trillions. The United States is trillions of dollars in debt. And the funny thing is, when you think about it, and it's in your money problems assignment, but there's no such thing as money. It doesn't actually exist. It's just an agreed upon unit of measurement that we can trade for goods and services. So the fact that we have a negative trillions of dollar balance, um, like a lot of people, especially in government, they act like it's, you know, like the end all be all, that somebody's gonna, you know, pull those loans and we're gonna be bankrupt and whatever. But the truth is that because money isn't real and it only has the value we assign it, then having trillions of dollars in debt doesn't actually have any repercussions in the long run, which is kind of hard to fathom, because, if you think about it, if money's not real, and you have a zero bank balance, and then you buy something and you get a negative balance in your bank account, and then the bank charges you overage fees on top of it. Now your negative balance is even more negative. But if you had no money, how can they take more than what you don't have? Um, so it's just that concept, that there even is a negative amount of money to be had, that shows us that money isn't real, because if it were real, then it would exist in real numbers, not in, you know, um, negative numbers as well. So definitely check that out. I find the whole um, money problems with the U.S. to be quite fascinating. Hope you do too. Maybe take some economics classes. Um, don't know if they're going to explain it quite as cool as this U.S. debt clock looks, but it's definitely something to check out. Definitely something to try to wrap your head around. Um, so anyway, I think I'm going to cap it there for introduction to the American system. If you guys have any questions, let me know.